Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm just going to start sharing my screen here. Let's see. And we're going to maximize this. Hey, folks, welcome. So please take a sec, introduce yourself in the chat. Welcome, everyone. As you're introducing yourself, make sure you set your chat settings to attendees and panelists. It's default to just panelists, so that means only Francesca and I will see it. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. So nice to see your names popping in here. I would love for you to, as Camille said, pop in the chat, share your name, share where you're joining in from. And if you have any particular struggles or challenges or questions about teaching private lessons, go ahead and drop those in the chat too. And I'll try to answer as many of your questions through this webinar as I'm able to.
Welcome to Annie, Paulina, and Rama, and Gabriella. Hello. All right, I'll give folks a couple more minutes. How was it joining the Zoom today, y'all? Were you able to get in okay, follow the links? Let us know. Easy, I love to hear it. Thanks for sharing, everyone.
Good.
Give just one more minute before I kind of kick it off, everyone. Welcome, Haley from Washington. Oh, thinking about teaching only private classes. Well, this is a great webinar to come to. So glad we're here.
Haley, have you taught any private lessons yet, or are you just getting started?
Also, Rachel, hi. Don't forget to change your chat to panelists and attendees. That way everyone will see your question. Cool. Haley says, just getting started. I've just taught family and friends so far. Okay.
That's a great way to start. Yeah, that's a really good way to start.
Rachel's outside of DC. So am I, Rachel. We're in the same geographic
zone.
So am I. Yeah. DMV, link up today.
Yeah.
Teaching for about 3 years. Welcome, folks. Well, please continue to introduce yourself in the chat as you join. I'll kick it off with a little overview and just kind of set the scene for this webinar today. My name's Camille Gallus, and I'm the partnership coordinator at Offering Tree, and I use she, her pronouns. So if you've never heard about Offering Tree before, we're an all-in-one and easy to use software platform for teachers to hold their courses, classes, and on-demand video. I like working for Offering Tree because we specialize in wellness. We have wellness entrepreneurs on our team. And I really think we all on the Offering Tree team understand how overwhelming it can be to start a wellness business. You graduate from your teacher training. Now all of a sudden you have to market yourself, accept money, build a website. It can feel really paralyzing sometimes, especially when you feel like we kind of see in our Instagram feeds, and I'll speak for myself, you need to earn 6 figures or have 10,000 followers or this huge audience, and it can feel overwhelming, like how can I do that? So we hold these webinars to be a place of continuing education and support as you grow your business. And also we believe that you can grow your business sustainably with a small community. That's why I'm so excited to welcome Francesca Cervero to this webinar. I'll let her introduce herself, but she is a yoga teacher, a yoga mentor, and a podcast host. And teaching private lessons is kind of her thing. If you have questions as the webinar goes on, drop them in the chat. I'll be here, but off camera. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll welcome Francesca.
Thanks so much, Camille. It's so great to be here with you all. So nice to see all the names and comments in the chat. Please keep the chat going. Anything that stands out to you, anything that you have a question about, please pop it in the chat. I really like to teach in a way that is engaged with the audience rather than sort of like me up on the stage just talking to no people in particular. That's not really my style. So I would love for you to just pop any questions that come up in the chat throughout, and I'll keep my eye on it so that we can stay engaged with each other. So as Camille said, I think she said this, I've been a yoga teacher since 2005. I use she, her pronouns as well. And I now live in Tacoma Park, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C., but began my teaching career in New York City and taught there for 10 years before I moved to the DC area. And I started teaching yoga in 2005. I was very young when I did my teacher training. I was just 22 years old. And so started teaching yoga the way I think certainly back then a lot of people taught, which is I was excited and willing to teach anyone, anywhere, because I was just so nervous but excited to start teaching and to engage with the students and to engage with yoga in this really kind of student to teacher powerful in-depth way. There's being a student, which is so richly powerful in the way that it helped me be in relationship with myself and see the world, I think, with a more clear-eyed lens. And then being able to take what I had learned as a student and what I had learned in my training and start to teach it to other people was just something I was so excited to do. And as a new teacher, as a very young person, I was only 22, so I didn't have a ton of real world experience. I knew that I would really take any teaching gig that was offered to me. So I worked pretty hard to build relationships with people and at yoga studios. And I got my first few teaching jobs, none of which were private students. Let's see, what were my first teaching gigs? So I subbed at a few different yoga studios. I think I had one, I applied to a yoga sort of business that placed yoga teachers in corporate teaching gigs. And so I got a job with them and got one class through them. I was kind of piecing together all kinds of different teaching opportunities. I got a job with the Parks Department in New York City and taught, I think initially 4 yoga classes at senior centers, which was an amazing experience. It was really sweet. We had 2 classes back to back at this one senior center. But most of the students came for the first class and just stayed also for the second class. So I had to kind of get creative about repeating things or not repeating things. But I just learned so much about teaching and about yoga and about what was important to me to come through in my teaching in those early teaching experiences. Okay, I'm just checking the chat. Good. And then, so I started teaching in the summer of 2005. And then I think it was January 2006, a friend of mine who I was working for, actually, she owned a Pilates studio and I was managing sort of the front desk operations at that Pilates studio. Like I said, just piecing together any work that I could get. She offered to pass a private client on to me. It was a person she'd been teaching for many years. She'd really enjoyed working with her. But she was kind of far away. We lived in Brooklyn and this client was way on the Upper East Side of New York City. So it'd take close to an hour to get there. And her Pilates practice was really thriving. And so she wanted to just stay closer to Brooklyn, stay closer to home. And so she was giving up a few of her clients that were further away. And she offered to pass this client on to me. So I was very grateful. I said, yes, of course, I would love to do that. And I had no experience teaching private clients. And I'm trying to think, I think I probably taught a little bit in my practice teaching when I was going through my training to my fellow trainees, kind of just would sometimes end up teaching just one person sort of in practicums. But there wasn't any discussion of teaching private clients in my initial 200-hour training. There's often not, I think, maybe a few hours here or there, but for the most part, it's not something that's really covered or certainly wasn't back then in teacher trainings, in my experience. So I didn't have a lot of ideas about like what a private lesson should be like, or what I should do, or what should happen. I went in very open and curious. And the friend who passed down this private client to me, the client was very lovely and was happy for my friend who was growing her Pilates practice and was excited to work with a new teacher. And so that was kind of a smooth transition. But what the friend of mine had said was, she's really easy to teach because she's not that interested in yoga. She just wants to be able to say that she does yoga. She has like a general idea that it's good for her, but she's just like not really that engaged. She really just wants to like chat half the time. You'll probably be in and out in like 45 minutes because she never wants to use the whole hour. So it was a little bit like, she's a nice person. She doesn't really care that much about it. It's pretty easy. You're just kind of in and out, no big deal. And so I thought like, okay, I didn't know what to think about that. I just was like, okay, easy sounds good. I'll take easy. But when I met with this student for the first time, nothing about that first private lesson felt easy. It felt very challenging to actually figure out what she was saying beneath the surface. She was pretty chatty. She did want to talk a lot, but it wasn't really necessarily so relevant to what she was experiencing in her body, or what she might want to work on, or what things she felt like she needed. It wasn't really about that. So I tried to figure out, based on what I could read in her body language and what she was saying, what in the yoga practice might be really helpful for her. And so I found that process of trying to like read between the lines, understand what was going on beneath the surface, very, very challenging and very, very interesting. And I loved it right away. And I thought like, this isn't boring at all. This is so hard and so interesting and requires so much of my creativity. And so that was sort of how I entered into that. Not because I thought that's how it should be, or that's how, no one taught me how to teach private lessons. I just kind of had this intuition that and this is, I think, true for really everyone. The tools of yoga are so powerful and they're so vast. There's so many different pieces of a yoga practice. There's, the asana practice is very rich, but there's so much more than asana as well. And so I just felt like there's so much here. There's got to be something in this technology, in this toolbox, in this ancient practice that could be helpful for this person. And how can I figure out how to do that? Because I think because I was so young, because I was such a new teacher, I didn't have a rigid view of like what yoga had to look like, or what yoga had to be to everyone. And I was open to taking the parts of the practice that would really be accessible and helpful to my student, and figuring out a way to get her to care. And so that was fun. I thought that was really fun. And that was just kind of how we went about it. And it took a while, but over time, because I was so focused on figuring out what parts of the practice would speak to her, and I was really focused on making it accessible for her, she did start to get a bit more engaged in her practice. She did start to become more curious. She did start to see more physical changes. We were mostly focused on asana at the time, especially at the beginning. And like what my friend had told me when she passed this client down to me was that she was lazy. She didn't really want to work that hard, which is, there's so much in the yoga practice that you could use to rest, to quiet down. So there's nothing wrong with that at all. But it was sort of like there was like a little tone of judgment. Oh, she's just lazy. She doesn't want to work hard. But I actually found that not really to be true with the student. I found that she was actually a very hard worker in her life. But when it came to her body and to her personal physical practice, she was uncomfortable in her body. She felt like she wasn't very strong. And whenever she tried to do something that felt physically challenging for her, she felt immediately like a failure. And so again, I had to kind of be creative, and I had the sense that building some physical strength would be really good for her. But that we had to do it in a way that didn't make her feel like a failure, that didn't make her feel like she was weak, but made her feel like she was strong. So I found little ways to try to make that strength work a bit more accessible. So just a very simple example, when just a simple bridge pose, like she was lying on her back, knees bent, feet flat on the floor, and I had her lift her hips. Oh my gosh, she would just feel like immediately her hamstrings would cramp and her calves would cramp, and she would immediately come down, and she never got to a place where she felt like she could, where she could like build strength, because it was so uncomfortable for her to be in that shape at all. So I had to find ways to help her feel like she could access some of that strength work. So we would do things like, we'd be in supported bridge, the block under her sacrum, just kind of resting, breathing into the belly, etc. And then I would say, okay, I want to just get a little work into your legs here. So for one breath, I'm going to take the block away. I want you to just hold the shape on your own for one breath, and then I'll put the block right back. And that really worked well. So just doing little things like that, figuring out more creative ways to make the work that I thought would be helpful for her more accessible. She did get stronger, and she did become more engaged in her practice. And as she got physically stronger and more engaged in her practice, we saw that impacting her life off the mat as well. Like when we first started working together, I always taught her in her kind of like living room right near where the front door was. And in the middle of our lesson, her kids would come home from school and her husband would come home from work. And as soon as everybody would burst into the door, even though we were in the middle of our lesson, they would ask questions, they would interrupt our lesson, they would demand a snack. She would like get up from our private lesson to go make them a snack and then come back. And over time, and it took quite a long time, at least 6 months, if not 8 months or closer to a year, as she became a little bit stronger in her body, as she had a practice that felt more unique and helpful and special to her, and she was more engaged in it, she also started to set better boundaries. So, 6 months, 8 months after we started working together, when people would burst in the door and demand a snack, she would just say, hey, I'm in the middle of my yoga lesson, but I'll be done in 30 minutes. There's an apple on the counter if you need something right now. And she started to just take a little bit more ownership over her practice. And so that was really, really gratifying to see. And so it was from her, she was my first private client, that my practice then grew, because what happened is she said, this is really making a difference in how I feel in my body, and how I feel at work, and how I feel in my life. And I'm so grateful for our work together, and I'd really love for you to teach my best friend. And so then she bought the best friend package of 5 lessons for her birthday, and we really hit it off. I was really able to help her as well. It was a totally different situation. This best friend had been practicing like very physical vinyasa yoga for 25 years. She'd been a D1 college athlete. She really was in her body in a way that her friend had not been. But I had the sense, used all her physical endeavors, how do I say it, as like a way to punish herself, or like all the hard physical work she did came from a place of feeling not good enough, rather than from like enjoying her strong, healthy body. And so I wanted to help her use her asana practice and her yoga practice more broadly to inhabit her body from a place of love, and to engage in the strong physical practices that she liked to do, because it was fun to enjoy her body, not as punishment. And so that was sort of a little bit of my focus with her. And so then it was probably, again, 6 months after I'd been working with her, maybe 8 months, that she asked me to teach her husband. And she had said, like, I don't think he doesn't like the idea of yoga. I don't think you're going to really like teaching him, but like, let's just try one session. Well, I was able to connect with him in a way that helped him see the benefits first of an asana practice and then of a mindfulness meditation practice could have on some of the sports he liked to play. And it was particularly golf. And so it took time, it took years to move from a strictly asana focused practice to something that was a little bit more broad and expansive of the full breadth of the practice. But it really made a difference in his golf game and in his life. And when his golf game started to get better, then I got emails from like all the other guys that worked at his firm because they were interested in what had happened to him. And so from there, my practice grew very quickly. Like I had one client for 6 months. I had two clients for another probably 6 to 8 months. I had three clients. So this is several years of just one and then two and then three. And then within a matter of months, my practice grew quite quickly and I was teaching 25 private yoga sessions a week. And I did that for many, many years. And still to this day, I'm teaching a little less now just because I have all this work that I do with teachers. But I teach probably like 15 to 17 private lessons a week now. And so in 2012, I wrote the curriculum for the Science of the Private Lesson, which is a teacher training that takes everything that I had happened to do intuitively and makes it specific teachable skills, because these skills are teachable, but most people need to at least have the seed planted for the difference that's possible in a private lesson versus a group class. So I have a lot more to say. Let me just pause and ask if there's any questions. If there's anything you want to pop into the chat, please do. Yeah, okay, great. I have to say, teaching private lessons online, just as someone mentioned, that works quite well. I teach all my private lessons online now and plan to continue, probably not forever. Honestly, I was planning to bring all my private clients back in person starting in September, but those plans have changed. So we can talk specifically about teaching private classes online. So someone asked, how much did I start charging those initial clients? So I think I charged $75 at the beginning. This is 2005, okay, in New York City. So it's a very expensive place. It's a long time ago, 16 years ago. And then I think I raised my rates to $90. And yeah, we can talk about pricing if you want. I want to get into like the meat of our topic today because, well, for a lot of reasons. I have a bunch of things to say, but Camille, I see do you have a question or something that you want?
I just wanted to share, as we get into Q&A after Francesca kind of dives into her resources, if you'd like to like speak and ask your question, Francesca, I have the opportunity to like give you your mic in this discussion. So we'd love to make this more interactive. So just as you're asking questions, just let me know and I can take care of that. Okay, that's all.
Okay, great. Thanks, Camille. Yeah. So Cami, I see that you said, do you see your privates more than once a week? I don't now. I have one client that I see twice a week now. And I will say, I was able to build up a practice seeing 25 private clients a week quite quickly, partly because many of those people I saw twice a week. And it's a very, very small subset of the population, frankly, that can afford a luxury like that twice a week. So that did make a difference in how fast I was able to grow my practice. And but now I just see one client twice a week, and most people I see once a week, and a few people I see once every 2 weeks or once a month based on their budget, which I'm thrilled to do as well. But what we're going to talk about today, which is sort of illustrated in those stories, I didn't know it at the time, but I have since unpacked it and uncovered it now, is what I call the support challenge matrix. So here's my pitch. I think that teaching private clients can be very stressful for teachers for two reasons. One is the intimacy and the vulnerability that comes in a one-on-one relationship, which we're not going to talk about today, but I'm happy to talk about in other settings. I talk about it a lot. And the other is that yoga is so huge. It's such a big, broad, vast subject with so many practices and so many tools and so many things that have the potential to be helpful. And I think that when you're working with a student, whether they're new or not, it can very quickly get overwhelming to think like, what should I be teaching them? What do they want to learn? What would be helpful for them? What's important? What matters most when I'm teaching a private client? And I think that teachers often second guess themselves, like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Or I don't know. I would actually love to hear in the chat if you've had that thought, like, how do I decide what to teach? You know, how that came through for you, because that's, I think something that is really common, even if you haven't even quite articulated it, but when you've been in a one-on-one setting, felt like just extremely overwhelmed. I do think part of that is because of the vastness of the subject. How do we sort of decide what matters most? So let me know in the comments if any of that resonates with you. Okay, yeah, so Haley, I'm going to address this in a second. Haley said, I'd love to hear some tips for how to approach teaching folks who don't have much body awareness and expect yoga to be like an aerobics class. My dad, who I've been trying to teach, sounds a lot like the golfer you mentioned. Okay, so here's the solution. So the pitch is, I think the teaching private lessons feels overwhelming because there's so many different ways that you could teach someone. And what I'm suggesting is that it's best for them in the short term and in the long term. And actually, most honors yoga, I think, when you teach them in a way that really gets them engaged with the practice, that really helps them care and feel connected and feel curious. And the best way to do that is using the support challenge matrix. So I'm going to share my screen, which just shows a very simple chart. So let me know if you can see that in the chat. Let me know if you can't see it or if you can see it. And I want you to just sketch this out so that you can make some notes. I'll give you some examples. But this is the support challenge matrix. Okay, you can see it. Okay, great. So here is the pitch. The pitch is, I think there are 4 elements of a private yoga lesson that any part of yoga, every asana, every pranayama, every meditation, the yamas and the niyamas fall into for each individual person. And those 4 elements are physical support, physical challenge, emotional support, and emotional challenge. Okay, so did you get a chance to sketch that out? I'm going to stop sharing just so you can see my face. Okay. So generally speaking, I advocate for a style of teaching that's pretty simple, because when we're teaching simple poses and simple sequences and simple themes, I think it leaves space for us to make the sessions very specifically useful on many levels for our students. So if you're not worried about fancy sequencing or really complicated theming, I think it's, especially in the beginning when you're just getting started with this, you can make sure that the warrior 1 that you are teaching your student is actually specifically helpful and interesting and useful for their body and their heart and their mind. So that's the basic principle, is that when we keep things simple, we're able to really make the teachings of yoga at their deepest level accessible and applicable to our students. So Elena says, I always end up falling into the trap of just creating a custom yoga class for them based on what they tell me they want and need. I think because they don't fully understand that it's supposed to be more interactive and they just think it's a one-off custom class. Well, let's see how you feel about that at the end of this, Elena, because I do think that creating a custom yoga class for them based on what they want and need is exactly what you should be doing. But we can get into the nuances of that. So let's keep talking about it, and then Elena, you tell me what you think. I think the only thing is that, if they're just thinking that it's a one-time thing and that there's not going to be longevity to it, that's different. Because I do think that when you're engaged in a teacher-student relationship where there's the intention to work together for quite some time, a lot more is possible than just like a random one-off. So as the initial setup and check-in is taking place, when you're getting ready to teach your private student, as things are getting organized in the room, you just want to turn on your intuitive brain and watch their body language and listen to what they're telling you, listen to what they're not telling you, listen to the quality of their voice, and ask yourself, what do you sense is going on with this person physically? What do you sense is going on with this person emotionally? Given that, what kind of support do they need? And given that, what kind of challenge would be beneficial to them? So I think that most private yoga lessons will include at least a little bit of each of the 4 elements: physical support, physical challenge, emotional support, and emotional challenge. So another way to ask yourself these questions is, given what they're telling me and given what I see in their body, what kind of physical support do they need? We're going to go through examples of all of these, so don't worry. The second question to ask yourself is, how much physical challenge would be beneficial for them? The third question is, what kind of emotional support do they need? And the last question is, how much emotional challenge are they open to and would be beneficial? So this is why I showed you that matrix, when you can make the chart, so you can sort of start to think about everything that your student experiences in these different categories. By the way, of course, what is physically challenging for one person is physically supportive for another, and vice versa. There's obviously no one size fits all. Everybody will respond to things differently, which is why paying attention to how our students respond to what we're teaching them and teaching them in a way that helps them feel good and curious and engaged is what matters most, which is why every single private lesson that you teach to different students should look completely different, in my view. So Kathleen asked, I think, is it Kathleen? Yeah. Do you use some sort of intake form? I don't right now, because I find that the information that I would get, if I just took an intake form and asked all those questions verbally, is usually much more rich than asking people to fill out a form. So I do have questions that I ask, and like sometimes we'll have a pre-lesson kind of phone call, and then questions again that I'll ask in our first lesson. But I'm also constantly asking questions. And the reason I like to do an intake verbally as opposed to in a written form is that I can ask a follow-up question, or you can hear the tone of someone's voice as they tell a story. I just feel like I get more information that way. And I take notes, usually when we're doing an intake. Oh, Kathleen says, yeah, the form is for you to use when you ask them questions. I do have a list of questions, which I can give you at the end if you want. I mean, they're pretty simple, but I think they're helpful. It's not that many questions, because usually if you get people talking, then there'll be follow-up questions that come to you naturally. Yeah. But let me give you examples of each of these 4 elements so you can start to see what I mean. So let's talk about physical support first. I think that's the one that usually makes the most sense to people, especially if they're primarily teaching asana. So physical support are poses and practices and movements that help people feel better in their body. So like if someone came in one day with a really stiff neck, maybe I would work on some shoulder mobility or some spinal kind of rib mobility to try to free things up higher up the chain, right? If they feel like if they've been sitting at their desk a ton, maybe we do some supported back bends to offer relief from too much sitting. If they feel like they're having trouble taking a full breath, maybe we do a class that's really focused on side bends and chest openers, just so they feel like they can get more breath in. Is this making sense? Drop in the comments, and drop in the comments too, please, other examples of things that you've done with your students that is specifically physically supportive and that it helps them immediately feel better in their body. So let's crowdsource some ideas. Will you drop in the comments? I'm gonna have a sip of water. So Haley said, okay, so you create the class in the moment with the student based on what they tell you instead of planning a sequence ahead of schedule. Mostly, yes. I do think when a student is new to me, when we're just figuring each other out, I'll have a few ideas of things I think I want to do with them, just so that I have something to fall back on if I'm not getting a lot of information from them in our initial conversation, because some people will talk a lot and some people won't tell you anything. So you have to kind of be ready for both scenarios. So I'll definitely have a few things generally planned, especially as I'm getting to know a student. But once we have a more established relationship, and sometimes that feeling of a more established relationship can take up to a year. So you have to give yourself plenty of time and be patient. But then I don't do that much planning ahead of time. But I do have sort of a general arc, especially as I've been working with someone for a long time, of things that I want, directions we're moving towards, is how I would say that. And then Haley asked, do you ever do the class with them / demonstrate? I don't. And this is one of the things, like, of sort of the two things I think I'm best known for in the yoga teacher community, is teaching private lessons and teaching without demonstrating. So I have a bunch of resources, Haley, that cover that, because I know, again, that's not the way everybody was taught to teach. But I find it much more beneficial to be able to witness and watch and support my students than it is for me to certainly be practicing with them. If occasionally they need me to show them something, I'm happy to show them something. But you can see I'm sitting in like a desk chair. This is where I teach 17 private lessons a week, sitting right from this chair. So yes, more resources there if we want to go there. Yeah. So let's talk about physical challenge. Okay, in physical challenge, you're asking them to do something that is physically difficult for them, but that you believe has some benefit. This might be something that helps them build strength, or maybe shift an old movement pattern. So examples would be obviously like anything that's strength building, which for some people, to build strength, they need a really challenging pose, forearm plank, something like that. The student I was speaking about at the beginning really just needed one breath in bridge pose to be strength building for her. So what looks like strength building will really vary a lot from person to person, but that is not always, but sometimes is physically challenging for people to sort of push themselves to build strength in that way. I think also sometimes physically challenging for people is asking them to move slowly if they're used to moving more quickly, or the opposite. If people really like to move slowly, challenging them to move a little bit more quickly sometimes could be physically challenging for them. Are these making sense so far? Physical support, physical challenge. And then now we come to emotional support. So this means that your students feel seen, they feel valued, they feel taken care of, they feel safe. Let me say right off the bat, emotional support does not mean letting them vent and chat for 20 minutes. That's not what it means. Okay, that's not, I don't think, usually the best way to spend private yoga lesson time. Unless you are also a trained, certified social worker, counselor, therapist, and you are on purpose doing hybrid talk therapy, movement therapy, yoga therapy, that's different. But if you are a yoga teacher, which is what I am, chatting for 20 minutes of a 60-minute session is not appropriate. So that's not what emotional support is. But it does mean that you're warm and friendly and you're encouraging and you're fully present. and they feel safe that they won't be judged or shamed for anything that they share with you. And it also means really paying attention and being able to make on the spot adjustments to things. So you might say to your student, you know, this restorative pose is not having the effect I thought it might. Like, I feel like being in this restorative pose make you feel more antsy. You want to get out of it, we can do something else. Just being willing to like just shift on the spot if it seems like what you were doing isn't having the intended benefit. So that's emotional support. Next and last is emotional challenge. So giving your students an emotional challenge means you're asking them to do something that brings up some inner body discomfort, okay? So there are sort of physical examples of this and non-physical examples of this. So like holding a pose for longer than they are comfortable could sort of be a physical challenge, or it could be an emotional challenge if they don't like that being still thing. I think a lot of people find quieter practices emotionally challenging, like shavasana, meditation for sure. I think also asking them to do things where they kind of get to know and make friends with their own body, like actually even just having someone touch their own body, I have seen be very emotionally challenging. I would say maybe like a lot of people are physically capable of working on inversions, but are afraid to go upside down, which is very valid. So let me give a few caveats about emotional challenge. There are going to be a lot of practices that cross over, as I mentioned, between physical challenge and emotional challenge. But one of those will be the predominant challenge. And it's really important, I think, that you try to figure out which one it is. So you're asking yourself, is holding this pose hard for them because they're physically not strong enough? Or is it hard for them because they don't think that they can do it and are afraid of failure? Both are 100% valid. And I'm not saying that you should ever force them to do something that's really uncomfortable for them. That's not what I'm saying. But it's great for you to have a sense of, and you'll be able to better support them if you understand why what you're asking them to do is challenging. And I'll say as well, I think offering your student a practice that is emotionally challenging requires a very trusting and good relationship between you and your student, and that can take years to develop. So I'm not at all suggesting that you push people, that you force them to do things they hate. No, that you purposely make them uncomfortable. Absolutely not. But we're just naming emotional challenge as one of the elements of ways that students will experience things that you teach them, so that you understand why they're responding the way they are, and you can adjust what you're doing so that it's helpful for them. I would say most of my students, I've really stayed away from emotional challenge, sometimes for years. I will say there are a few people who respond kind of well to it. And so then we'll sort of do it a little bit earlier. But for a lot of people, I wait for years and years and years. Like, let's take Shavasana, for example. I had a few students who absolutely hated it. It made them anxious, it made them uncomfortable, it made them stressed out. So we didn't do it because it was emotionally challenging for them. But several years into our work together, I felt like they were ready, and they were ready to be pushed a little bit. And I wanted them to start to experience the more full breadth of the teachings of yoga. And so I said, okay, it's January. We've got a new thing we're working on this year. It's resting. I know you guys don't love this, but I think it will be good for you. I'd really like for you to try it. But that took probably 3 or 4 years before I asked them to do that. So I'm not saying you're going to have 25% physical challenge, 25% physical support, 25% emotional support, and 25% emotional challenge. Some people, what you're going to do is what people respond best to, because what you need is for your student to be engaged and to care. So I think what is helpful about this framework is it helps you start to see and identify the things that people respond well to and the things that people don't respond well to. Certainly in the beginning, you do more of the things that they respond well to. But as your relationship grows and as their practice deepens, you can start to bring in elements that are more challenging for them, which could be physical support. They might not like doing things that are intended to help them feel better in their body because they are used to just like pushing through. So everyone will react to these things differently. But the more well-rounded you are able to bring their practice to be, I think, the more they'll continue to grow. But it takes a really committed relationship between the two of you to be able to expand to that full breadth of the practice. But what I think would be helpful if you have this chart is to, of course, make any notes that you want about it, but also to think about a student you've taught. And then and you could do this for one student, write down in a copy of this chart what's been challenging for them physically and emotionally, what's been supportive for them physically and emotionally, and parse out the different things you've taught them and how they've responded to that. I think that's a great exercise. I'm just reading comments. So let me know how that's landing. Let me know what questions you have. Yeah, so Corinne said, very interested in your choice not to move with them. Can you speak about why you choose it and how you think it helps your students and your business? I really think that our students benefit more from our attention than they do from our demonstration, is the bottom line. But I have a podcast all about this. It's called The Case for Teaching Without Demonstrating, which goes into a lot more depth there. But I just know that I can better support them if I'm paying better attention to them. And I can't pay attention to them if I'm on my mat. That's what I think. Let me know if that makes sense. So let me know, y'all, in the comments, how is this landing? A support challenge matrix. Are you starting to maybe be able to see, oh yeah, my student really didn't like that. Now I can see why. It's because it was emotionally challenging for them. What might you want to do about that? Yeah, there you go. Thanks, Camille. She dropped the podcast episode in the chat. I'd love to hear though, how does this land? What questions do you have about the support challenge matrix, or if there's any other questions you have about teaching private lessons, please drop them in the chat. And I'll put up this chart again. So if you didn't get it before, you can get it now. Because again, you can, take your notes about what happens in each one of those, but also do that for each student. And I think that'll be really helpful.
I'm popping up just to help answer questions, so
yeah,
proceed.
Thanks, Camille. Okay, so I'll stop the share now. I just want to pop that back up again. Yeah, so Elena says, that makes sense. And I love that about attention rather than demonstration. But my issue is that my students' tech setup doesn't make it easy for me to really see them well most of the time. Yes, I know. I spent a lot of 2020 like getting my students set up in a way that I could see them and helping other teachers get their students set up in a way that they could see them. So this takes time and it's a lot of work, but it's very, very worth it to ask your students to set up their camera, to set up their mat in a way that allows you to see them. I have a little graphic. I'm wondering if there's an easy way I could grab this for you. I have a little graphic that we made that we sent out to all my students that shows like, this is what helps me see you the best. You have to have a little bit of space. You have to be a little further away from the mat, the camera and the mat have to be a little further away than most people realize. I like a horizontal view. When we first moved to Zoom in March of 2020, I did like little 20, 30-minute free sessions with every single student of mine to make sure they felt comfortable with the tech and to help them figure out where to place the mat and the camera so that their setup worked well. So it's very time intensive, Elena, to get your students set up in a way you can see them. And it's very, very worth it. So Haley says, without demonstrating, do you find it hard to explain poses and transitions for people who aren't familiar with yoga already? I found that a lot of people new to yoga can't arrange their body without a visual demonstration. So, like I said, I'm very happy to show someone something briefly if they need to, but I just don't have the default be like, I never have had a mat with me when I teach. I don't have the default be me on my mat. Um, I do find that students who are new to yoga, it does take a little bit more time often to help them learn how to connect language to movement if they're not used to that. But I think it's one of the beautiful things that we get to teach as yoga teachers. And especially in a private yoga setting, you can really take the time to figure out what kind of language makes sense to them, speak to them in a way that they understand. So it takes a little bit of time at the beginning, but I really think it's worth it to get them used to having their attention inward and on their own experience rather than outward. Because the other thing is, if I'm doing the practice with them or if I'm showing them a lot of what I'm teaching them, then first of all, it puts the priority or the emphasis on the aesthetics of a shape, which I think is like the least important part of it. And it makes them think like, oh, they're supposed to look like me, which certainly if they're new to yoga, they probably won't. So again, I just think it's worth it to take the extra little bit of time to figure out how to speak to them in a way that it makes sense to them. So let's see. Can you give us a skeleton breakdown of first session you do with clients? I think I have a podcast episode about this. If not, I definitely have a blog. Yeah, Camille, do you want to
Search
see
for
if
it.
there's a search function on my blog? Yeah, there's a search function.
Do you want me to
So there
search
is a
like
breakdown of that.
first session?
Yeah, if you Google like first lesson, I think it'll come up. Or not Google, just search in the search function on my blog. And so that blog post goes through like physically what I would recommend you do. It's very general because obviously people have very different physical capabilities. I teach some people who are quite limited in their physical ability, like can spend a little time sitting in a chair and a little bit of time lying down, but can't stand, can't be on hands and knees, so like there's that sort of, and then I teach people who are extremely physically active and physically fit. So the first session that I lay out on that blog is sort of like halfway between those two people, but it'll give you something to work with, I think. Yep, there it is. Awesome. Thank you so much, Camille. Yeah, great. Yeah, okay, let's see. Any other questions? Any other thoughts? Okay, good. This is a good question. So do you find that it's tricky to draw the line between supporting someone in a yoga practice versus moving into a realm that a yoga teacher may not be qualified to address, like talk therapy or physiotherapy in relation to physical emotional challenge? So I appreciate this because it's very important to me that we understand that we're staying within our scope of practice. So if we're doing something that's intended to offer physical support, it's within the context of I'm your private yoga teacher and we want to use your yoga practice to be supportive for you. Let me just read the rest of the question. But I 100% refer other health professionals and I do it often. So I have several different physical therapists that I recommend. I have other like counselors and therapists that I've recommended. And certainly with the physical therapist, I will try to partner in my students' care. So when we get them to go to PT, I will get on the phone with the physical therapist and hear about what they're noticing, what they're working on, so that I can make sure that I'm not doing anything that's contraindicated. But I'm very clear about my scope of practice. I'm not a physical therapist. I'm not a psychotherapist, and I recommend my students work with those people all the time. It's just that we want the yoga practice that our students are doing to be uniquely supportive to them, which is why we're paying attention to how they respond to the different things that we're teaching, but not because we are diagnosing or treating. We don't do those things at all. So I appreciate you bringing up that question. Yeah, no, I don't, it's not too broad at all, Annie. It's perfect. And it's very possible to support people without overstepping. Absolutely. So my sessions, Haley, are 75 minutes now. When I taught in New York, most of my sessions were 60 minutes, but I mentioned I was also seeing people often twice a week. When I moved to DC and was working with a little bit of a different population for whom, even once a week was a huge kind of luxury, twice a week was not going to be an option. 60 minutes felt too short. So I do 75 minutes with most of my students now.
It's a really nice chunk of time, I think, for
It
investment in a
is, yeah.
private lesson.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, doesn't feel too rushed. Yeah, excellent. Okay, so a question about packages. I don't sell packages now because I feel like a package is a little bit of like an off ramp. It's like, oh, well, my package is done. I guess I'm done, and I really, if students are interested, I really like to be there to support them for the long term. And I also don't want people locked in if it's not a good fit or if it's not working for them. So I will just recommend that we start with one lesson, see how it feels, see how it goes. And then if they liked it, then recommend to set a weekly or monthly standing schedule, kind of like in perpetuity. And some people do it for a few years and then stop. Many of my clients really do like to work with me for the long term because of the very specific and unique way that I teach them. It's like I'm really me, and more importantly, their yoga practice is a soft place for them to land no matter what else is happening in their life. So people, even when they've been injured and haven't been able to practice much asana, we've continued to work together and explored other parts of the practice. There's just so much there, right? So I just bill students at the end of the month for all the sessions that they had. Yeah, so Annie says, referring to the question about scope of practice, this makes sense. Thank you. I think it will take some practice and experience to truly draw the line, but totally support referring out and working with others to support a client. Yes, it will. And I really think that not overstepping bounds into like too much chatting is a very good first step. Like in a 60-minute session, you get 7 minutes to check in with them, hear how they're doing before you have to be in some kind of yoga practice. In a 75-minute session, okay, maybe you get 10 minutes, but that's it. And then you are teaching them something about yoga. They're in their yoga practice. And I think that's a good start anyway to just keeping to your scope of practice as a yoga teacher. Someone asked, how long do you take with the verbal intake? It really varies depending on how much people are willing and open to talking. So some people, give very short, brief answers. I have to ask a lot of follow-up questions to get any information. I would say at least 20 minutes, though, I would spend in the verbal intake. Some people have long stories to tell about their health history, about their body, about their experience with meditation. So I could go in a 75-minute session up to like 30 or 40 minutes for the very first session. Usually it doesn't take quite that long, but I think it would be okay if it did. So I think the more information you have about them, the better.
Well, last call for questions, folks. Oh, here we go. Last one.
Do I charge for the verbal intake? If it's part of a scheduled lesson, which it is, yeah, I just charge like a regular private lesson. So I will sometimes, depending on how someone found me or got connected with me, I will talk with them on the phone first, where I'll ask a lot of those questions. That's free. But when we have our first scheduled 75-minute lesson, yeah, I charge for that.
Got a couple more questions, but Francesca, I want to be mindful of your time as well. So we can definitely talk about how to reach you and get in touch. Yeah.
Yeah. So someone asked, how do you bring in the whole 8 limbs of yoga or the spiritual side? This really varies person to person. I do intend to bring it in when they're ready. Some people are ready right away. And some people, like I said, it took years of just asana before we were ready to bring in other limbs. And so I really wait until it seems like they're ready for it. But it's certainly my intention to bring it in. And most people I do end up bringing it in eventually, just can take a little bit of time. And I think I have I think this was more about group classes, but there was a podcast episode about integrating Dharma teachings into asana classes. So that would cover a little bit of like how I think about it, although I think that's more geared towards group classes. Last question is from Elena, and she says, how do you make it clear to them that to really receive the benefits from the practice, it would be best if they keep coming back and you work together longer term? It's a very good question, Elena. You know, it's hard to really say that from the outset. You know, I think that people certainly start to figure it out. And what I will say, if they're feeling frustrated with, it's taking them a long time to make progress or something, is I'll say something like, good thing you have the rest of your life. Now, that doesn't have to be with me as a teacher, but that is their yoga practice is here for them for the rest of their life. So I say, like, we got all the time in the world, you know? And that's just sort of my attitude about it. And I think honestly, like, I really do have the commitment to show up for my students long term, because it's been so beneficial for me, for the few teachers that I've worked for the long term who have kind of seen me through ups and downs, that I just sort of have that in my heart. And I think it just comes out in little more subtle ways, rather than like in the first lesson be like, just so you know, you're going to have to do this forever if you want things to be different. Like, I wouldn't go in hard like that, you know, but I think it comes through if you really believe it. Oh, you're so welcome. Yeah, thanks everyone. Yay. Well, let's connect. So if you're not already on my newsletter list, that's the best way to hang with me, to get a hold of me. So you can go to teachprivateyoga.com, and there's a short video series that you'll get about teaching private lessons, as well as like tons of other resources that I've created about a lot of things we've talked about here. I've been making free resources for yoga teachers on the internet since 2012. So there's a lot there. And then, yeah, other ways that we can stay connected. So thank you guys all so much for being here. This was really, really fun.
Thank you, Francesca, and thank you everyone who was here today. We'll be sending a replay video in your email, and I will also link to some of these great resources that Francesca shared. So thank you, everyone. Have a great week.
Bye.